All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live here at MythVision Podcast. You want to stay tuned. This is going to be an amazing discussion, interview from Jon Steingard, who is, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correct, who is one of the lead singers, or was the lead singer of Hawk Nelson. And I used to listen to them back when I was a Christian. So stay tuned. Before we do that, I always tell you guys, I'm always chasing the gods, right? But I've kind of given up on that. The gods have decided they want to chase me. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm the host, Derek Lambert. I hope you guys stay tuned because it's not often that you find Christians who deconvert to some other agnostic, or they just don't know. They give up on the faith they once had. They're like, this just doesn't make sense anymore. But how often is it that a lead pastor, let's say, or a lead singer of a Christian band who has all this responsibility, all these quote unquote souls looking up to him, saying his faith must be strong in Jesus. And I can't imagine him ever not believing anymore. All those songs that they felt him sing or the music that he played, they saw and they said, I want the faith that lead singer has. And today, the lead singer is going to tell us about why he left Christianity. It's going to be an interesting discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we get started, I want you guys to go and subscribe to Jon's YouTube channel. It is down in the description. Let's help it grow. He covers lots of topics. I mean, he's had Shannon Q on. He's had a bunch of different people. He's actually discussed his deconversion story to his own audience. And of course, he's been interviewed by other people, including Joe Baden, which I've interviewed here at MythVision Podcast. So there's an overlap on ideas between my channel and, of course, the things that Jon is into. I used to listen to Hawk Nelson as a Christian, and I'm not going to lie. There's sometimes a Christian song comes on and you just feel it. You're like, I like the feelings, right? Doesn't mean I ontologically believe in it or that it has like a legitimate epistemological, oh yeah, this is true because no. But sometimes the songs sound good. And also I have the Patreon. So if you're not a Patreon member, I'm not kidding. I say this every time, hundreds of videos that have not been released to the public that may one day eventually find their way out of darkness into the light of the YouTube world. You can access all of that early, including asking personal questions for scholars that I go and interview, and I will ask your question. Oftentimes with my high definition camera, I ask in your name. Joe so-and-so asks Dr. Robert M. Price, Dr. Joshua Bowen, you name it. The list goes on of scholars. So if you're interested in joining and helping participate, growing what we do, please consider becoming a patron. That helps me do what I'm doing. Now, since we're done plugging all this stuff here, Jon, I think it's important to ask you, what happened, man?
What's going on, Derek? Well, first, thank you for having me on. Thank you for hosting this conversation. I've been sort of taking a little bit of quiet time with family for the last months from doing online stuff and putting out episodes, conversations and stuff. So it's nice to be back with you and to have a conversation about stuff that I think we have a lot in common. Yeah. So, I mean, but as far as what happened, I mean, the short version is some of the people that criticize me have a point. One of the criticisms I've gotten over the last year is that they feel like my faith was really cultural and not really based on anything that was necessarily a truth that I had personally discovered. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true, actually. Like, I think I grew up in a Christian home. My dad's a pastor. I was in a very charismatic environment that's very emotionally charged. That's part of what got me into, music in general, is being into like worship music and being on the worship team and,
Well,
growing up in church like that. Yeah.
I loved the music. Like when Christians talk about, and it's not all, one thing we have to start learning to do, and I'm bad about this sometimes, is painting one size fits all. It's all Christians are the same. They all think the same. No, there's a lot of differences in the way they approach these things. But there are a lot of Calvinistic, or if you will, Baptist, once saved, always saved types, who act like you and me were never really Christians.
And I've gotten that tons. Yeah. And people have said, like, oh, well, he was never one of us. And right. I always think that phrasing is telling, because you're painting it in a very like oppositional us versus them sort of motif. Mm-hmm. It's built right into the language, which I think is interesting and sort of telling. But yeah, I mean, I would sometimes the most disarming response to that I can give is like, well, maybe that's true. Like maybe I was never a quote unquote real believer, whoever gets to determine what that is.
Exactly.
But it's sort of, to me, it leads to a bigger point of like, how do you know that your faith is real? How do you know that you believe genuinely? Because like for most of my all of my childhood and then a large portion of my adult life, I did think that I believed genuinely. And I may have had questions about details, but like Christianity and Christian communities, those were my people. That was my community. And so I just didn't, for a long time, I just didn't question it. And I believed it. I thought. And so like, how do you know that you really believe? I mean, at some point, like, shouldn't we just take people's word that they believe a thing that they say they believe? Because like, what else do we have?
That's a really well put way of saying it. And you're really gentle about it. I'm fairly certain I was a believer.
Yeah.
I mean, like I can only say what I know, but there's obviously they'll go, well, you didn't stay. The evidence of being one is that you stay, and if you don't stay, well, you never really were one of us. That's
and there's a scripture that's deals with this, and I'm bad at references, so I was bad as a Christian at remembering like scripture references, and I'm bad now. But basically, it says something to the effect of like those that fall away. I'm paraphrasing, but those that fall away, like they were never one of us, or something like that. Like there's scriptural backing for saying things like that.
Yeah.
But then there's, nothing ever will separate us from the love of God. There's that. And, he is reconciling all things unto himself, like Paul said. So it's like, it depends what you want to read and how you want to read it.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So you were a guitarist for 8 years, if you will, for the band. Mm-hmm. You were really, really tight. Were they like best friends of yours? What kind of relationship did you have in the band?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of bands have internal struggles, internal tension. Sometimes that's part of just the DNA of the personalities in the band. Sometimes it actually like helps create the things that they need to create, It's really common to have bands that on stage seem fine, but off stage can't stand each other. Super common. That was not us. If anything, like our personal relationships were part of what kept our band going for so long, because we just really loved each other and liked being around each other. Like we didn't just love each other. We liked each other.
Yeah. No, I mean, I get it. Like brothers can love each other, but you can be annoyed by them,
Yeah. So like we had this, and anyone that's been a part of maybe a small company or like a small team, or like maybe a sports team is a good example. Like you develop this camaraderie of like, these are my people. We have a shared goal, and we love working toward that goal together. And so, I mean, we definitely had some personnel changes over the years that we did the band. So we did the band for like 16 years. But during that time, it's not like there was never any tension, but for the most part, we really enjoyed each other. And that I think was part of the glue of us staying together as long as we did.
You guys would pray together. You guys would sing together. I suspect there were times that
Well,
you guys went to church together. I mean,
so for a lot of it, we didn't always live in the same city. Obviously, we started out sort of in the same place, and honestly, like in our private lives, individually and as a band, we weren't as overly spiritualizing as maybe some other, like we weren't a worship band, for instance. So we were like a pop punk band that happened to be made up of Christians that wanted to make stuff that was, positive and, like helpful. Very quickly, we got kind of intertwined with youth group culture in the mid, 2000s. And so
that's when things were taking off.
Oh, yeah. It was a special time, man.
Yeah.
So our approach was not overly spiritual. So like we didn't do devotions as a band. We didn't. I mean, we would do, like, we would before a show we'd say like, let's toss up, and so that would mean like, let's just like let's gather around and like toss up a quick prayer. And we did do that a lot, but it wasn't this super drawn out, lengthy, like hyper emotional, hyper spiritual thing. It was more like, hey, like God, like let's please, be a part of this night, because I mean, if you're not, it's just us banging on some instruments. That's kind of, and so it would be sort of almost like a focusing meditative thing. And obviously we all did believe in God, so we were hoping that God would, participate in the concert we were about to play. Yeah.
How did things, and we're going to get into like some of the details, I think, that really, as you left, started to make you think. I mean, it's not all at once is the way I had the experience, and a lot of people. Right. So in terms of your relationship as a band, how did it go down in terms of you finally opening up to the world and saying, okay, look, I'm not going to lie. Like, I have to say what I think and what I'm believing right now.
Yeah. Well, I started having, it was interesting. I started having doubts in proportion to how my life was moving on from the band already. So we had been doing the band for like 15 years, and my wife and I had at that point just our first child, and we've got two now. But I was just feeling like I sort of wanted to tour less and travel less, and the demands of being in a commercial band where we've got a larger, like if you're a solo artist, you've got a lot of flexibility, but if you're a band, you have at least 4 families to sustain. Plus there's, manager, PR, booking, label, like there's a lot of cogs in the wheel, and that stuff all needs to be, you need to have enough momentum to maintain all that.
Right.
And so there's a lot of pressure, like to put out an album every other year, and the album has to be amazing, and it has to have at least 3 radio hits. Otherwise you're screwed, Yeah. And so all of that pressure, with me at that point being the lead singer at that point, and being the main songwriter, there was pressure to always generate hits. There was pressure to tour. There was all these pressures. And I started to have the question of like, how long do I want to do this? Are there other ways of living that might be more conducive to having a family and that kind of thing? And so I had started to do film work on the side, just sort of recreationally for fun and for the band. And as that sort of side hustle grew, it became apparent like, hey, I could do this for a living. And as my life started to move in that direction, and I didn't really need, I started to have enough revenue from that I was like, hey, this could be my career. I started, realizing I wanted to go in that direction. And then as my life moved in that direction, that's when I started noticing these doubts, because I think before, when I was completely reliant on the band for income, for social connection, for community, it required that I'm a Christian, right? It required that I hold these certain beliefs. But in my film work, nobody cared whether I was a Christian or not. And so that opened up this sort of, it's okay to question. And once it was okay to question, I had a lot of questions. And so I'm still doing shows with the band and stuff like that. But we were starting to already sort of phase it out. And I started being honest with my wife, with the guys in the band, like, hey, I've got these questions that are really bothering me. And I felt the freedom to explore those questions more once I realized I wasn't going to be destitute and homeless for asking them.
Were you the only one who in the band started to doubt and actually start considering like, okay, you could be right? Or did every one of them like kind of like just close off and say, look, we respect that, but we're not.
They were very supportive. But I was the only one like actively going like, hey, no. These are problems. Like, this is a big problem. I think some of the other guys were like, yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying there. But there's this tendency to sort of like, well, if I ask that question too loudly and take that road too far, at what point do we not have a career anymore? And that's where I empathize for other Christian artists, pastors. All the time. I think about pastors, and over the last year, I've spoken to pastors who have questions. The thing there too is like their questions might not even be deal breakers for them, but even non-deal breaker questions pastors can't really ask openly because not in every church, I suppose. Like, there's more progressive churches where questioning is much more welcomed.
Right.
But that's not the majority of Christian churches, right? That's probably not your experience either.
No, I came from an evangelical background that was pretty like, we were intense, and we were the hyper spiritual ones. Like, I would listen to your bands while I'm driving. Like, I'd be listening to Hawk Nelson on like a rock and roll day, but I was listening to like Hillsong from time to time and like worshipy type, really deep. Let's get into the spiritual. And that's what I did for a long time. Like, those were my favorite types. You're going to love this. Carmen. I mean, like, people like, you know what I'm saying? Like, really into these old.
I remember seeing Carmen when I was a teenager, live. It was intense.
Interesting.
Yeah.
His whole like concept in one of his songs is Jesus went to hell for 3 days and he's like fighting Satan. Like, we did a play at my church about all this stuff. So yeah, it was really heavy evangelical, very spiritual, non-denomination. We spoke in tongues type things for many years. Eventually I gradually like started to like go, I need to mature in this. And this seems a little too I grew out of it as I started reading more about the Bible. And then I became, Calvinist and went into more Protestant-y type of movements. But in light of your deconversion, if I may ask, you had some doubts. What were those questions? If you don't mind?
No, not at all. I mean, there was a series of them. Now, I think in retrospect, some of my questions could have been resolved without leaving Christianity. They were just all lumped in together for me. For instance, like I grew up being taught basically young Earth creationism, that the Earth is 6,000 years old. Now, I know now that you can be a Christian and not believe that.
Right.
But that was a leap that that wasn't a leap. I was bunching it all together. You can affirm evolution in principle and be a Christian, but I was taught growing up that evolution was a lie. And so unfortunately, and I'm looking at you, Christians, like, there is a history of some pretty bad ideas in Christianity that even most Christians now have to admit are not true. By dogmatically holding on to those things, like, you're going to lose people because you're holding on to, there might be some things you need to revisit. Right. So those weren't the central ones for me, though. It's just like I noticed those in retrospect that I was lumping them all together. And so some of them I set to the side because I go like, okay, well, that's not foundational. But really the biggest one for me is the problem of evil. And I know that when I say that, Christians are usually like, oh, are you kidding me? That old chestnut? Like, because they feel like it's been resolved. And I just don't. And it's like, I get Christians all the time telling me like, yeah, there's very good solutions to the problem of evil. And I'm like, trust me, like I've spent a lot of time on this. Like I know the solutions. I'm not satisfied with them. And it really came to a head for me when I did a documentary film in Uganda. And I documented this tribe there called the Batwa. And I just saw, I mean, it's a little bit the sort of stereotypical, like middle-aged white dude goes to Africa, has his, has his mind blown by the things he sees. It's cliche for a reason. I mean, that's definitely something people experience. And I just saw suffering that was on it's not even about scale. It's about particularity for me. I saw children suffering in really horrible ways. And I had recently become a father. And so I was just, so 50% of Batwa children don't make it to the age of 5 for a number of reasons. And so seeing a 4-year-old take care of a 2-year-old because that 2-year-old had no one else, seeing stuff like that made me go like, okay, like I'd always been taught that God is intimately involved in our lives and intervenes on behalf of his children. Like that's the type of God. Right. Yeah. And so I saw this situation and I'm like, look, I'm a parent. If my children were suffering like this, there's nothing I wouldn't do to change it. I just can't believe that there's an all-powerful and all-loving God looking at this situation and being like, yeah, I'm not going to do anything about that. Because to me, it's like, well, either that God is not loving, or that God is not all powerful, or that God is not there. Like those are the options for me. And every Christian has to choose one of those first two. Most Christians would say God has good reasons for not intervening.
It's always hidden things like, yeah, well, after this world, he has plans for this child. It's
right.
It's so small in comparison. Like, but that gives to me, it's not satisfactory like it is for you. It's like, we're not satisfied with that kind of answer at all.
Yeah. And, I understand the free will defense. That's a common defense for the sort of, the more philosophical approach to the problem of evil. Like God wanted man to have free will, and that's why there's so much evil in the world. But that doesn't resolve the problem of natural evil, which is like famines, earthquakes, and disease, viruses, COVID-19. Why is COVID-19 necessary? And to that, most Christians would respond, well, it's the fall. And I'm like, well, that seems like a really convenient plot device, Yeah. Like to me, that feels more ideological in nature, where it's like a device that was created to explain a problem. But that's
like
how I see it.
A myth trying to explain why we die. I mean, it's really simple. Like, why is death in this world? Okay, let's have a myth.
Why do we die? Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's really like, it's the same problem in the Mesopotamian background. When you go into the Gilgamesh epic, in that tablet, you see the same problem with Gilgamesh struggling, going, well, my best friend died. Like now he's facing the reality that we all are going to die. How do I beat this thing? How do I find immortality? And of course, he's on this journey, wandering the world, trying to find it. So well said. What are some of the other things that once you okay, so I suspect, and I'm trying to read into like maybe what you dealt with, you're chewing on this stuff. Like you're but you have not fully come out, but you're already heading in that direction of saying like, it just doesn't work. But as the doors open, like, all right, it's like confession. All right, listen, I don't think I believe anymore. And I can't tell you like the weight of like having to hide that and just say it. There's kind of this weight lifted in a way where you're like, look, this is not to flaunt and to brag or anything like that. It's simply like, I feel good that I'm able to just say this. I'd be happy to be convinced. But I just don't see sufficient evidence now that I'm being more skeptical in my approach. So the question is, once that door opened, or maybe it's before that, other questions you had that you didn't have sufficient answers for, and now you start seeing more problems.
Yeah, so, I had a string of them. Mm-hmm.
Okay, please continue.
Yeah. So some of them are social, and then some of them are more evidential. So like the social ones were, I started noticing that my own gut instinct was leading me in different directions on certain social issues than the Christian community at large. So when when same-sex marriage was legalized in the United States, my immediate gut reaction was like, well, that seems like a good thing, right? It's like,
Right.
it seems like progress, but I couldn't immediately. I was like, well, I can't say that publicly. Like I'll lose my career. And I'm just like, well, that's a problem. There's a disconnect there between where my gut is taking me and where the culture I'm embedded in says I should go. So that was one thing. There's a few things like that where just like socially, like trying to understand the evangelical, and I don't want to get overly political here, but this is, I'm just going to speak for myself, trying to understand the enthusiastic embrace of Trump by evangelicals was sort of tricky for me, because I remember, like even on like certain moral issues, like, I remember like Monica Lewinsky thing being like Bill Clinton having an affair being like a huge issue in the 90s, like a total deal breaker. And then on Trump, like leave all other issues aside, there's a lot of potential problems in that area of his life if you want to look at it through that lens as an evangelical. And yet evangelicals were like, yep, we're good with this guy, he's our man. Like that was sort of like, wait, what? This seems strange.
Yeah, I must admit, I don't talk politics on here, but I'll tell you.
Yeah, I try to avoid it.
It's okay. No, and I don't blame you. I understand. I will say this one thing though. I know some friends who were Trump supporters, right? But they obviously saw a huge problem in the cult that developed around this guy, the QAnon and stuff. So, and notice many Christians fell into that trap.
A lot.
Yeah, and it's like, whoa, what just happened here? So yeah, there's something.
So that was some of the social stuff. I would say those were motivating factors for me, but they weren't like, they don't prove anything one way or another. They're just sort of like things that I noticed. The things that really got to me was when I really started studying the Bible, because, and you're familiar with this, the evangelical notion of what the Bible is usually involves inerrancy and fallibility. Those two terms are not exactly the same thing. Right. But in general, everyone can sort of agree in the evangelical circles that like the Bible is the word of God. When you read the Bible, you can basically take it as like, these are messages that God wants you to receive and respond to and live your life according to. The problem is that no one agrees on what this stuff means. And when I started digging into some of the details, I'm like, wow, like there's some really different interpretations of not just like secondary issues, but primary issues. Like we don't all, not all Christians agree on atonement, what it is. And, and then looking historically at the way that the story of Jesus seems to have evolved over time. Like I didn't know that, before I started looking into it, I didn't know that that Paul's epistles were written before the Gospels. Like most Christians probably don't know that. Right. I didn't realize that the virgin birth was not mentioned anywhere in Paul's writings, not mentioned in the earliest gospel to have been written. It's not mentioned until Matthew and Luke, and the story is completely different in those two books. And those books were both written at least 30 years after the fact, probably not by eyewitnesses. So it's like, wait a minute, like virgin birth. Also, there were virgin birth stories in lots of mythology before Christianity. It was a common literary device to denote significance of a leader. And so that's just one example of like a bunch of things where I was like, wait, like this, like if something like Christianity was going to arise out of evolving stories that people were telling, you would expect it to look exactly like it looks. And so that was one thing. And then, going into the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, some of the ways that God is depicted in some of those scriptures gave me pause. Like I came across like Deuteronomy 20 that talks about, like God telling the Israelites to take slaves.
Yeah.
Explicitly. Now I've heard people debate on what kind of slavery are we talking about, but that passage does not sound like indentured servitude. And, then you've got Numbers 31, where it seems to be like, them taking sex slaves. It's problematic. And these are things that, I wasn't taught about any of this as a Christian. And so I don't know if maybe you had some of the same experiences where you came across biblical things where you're just like, well, this doesn't mean that God's not real, but it does mean I can no longer look at the Bible as the perfect word of God.
I think the evangelical world, with the inerrancy and infallible approach, set themselves up for failure.
I agree.
There are many, in fact, most Christians on earth are some form of orthodoxy, if you can use the whole totality, and they allow for these like nuances and issues and sources. They don't expect perfect. They don't expect almost perfect. They don't expect we have exactly the correct, or down to the T. And when you do that, all it takes is a few of those brain busters to happen. And you're like, my whole world shattered, like young earth creationists. There are some young earth creationists on planet earth right now that if they actually dug and they start to realize, oh snap, the earth is not 6,000, 7,000 years old. And they really found that out, it will make them like atheist, probably full blown all the way, because then they go, everything's destroyed. So when a development could happen and they start to like treat the piece of literature like it is pieces of literature, you could say you think they were inspired. You could say, but the whole Protestant infallibility, inerrancy that we see is going to be a like more and more a problem as scholarship keeps heading in the direction that it does. Because even right now, most of critical scholars are Christians. Most. Yeah. And so it's heading in a direction where guys like me who are like, there's some people who are never in the faith who are actually into this stuff, but most people are in the faith. Guys like me who are coming on and who are going to go, I'm going to do my PhD program. I'm going to look into this stuff. They're going to start just kind of looking at it like they would look at Homer or they would look at any other ancient literature and not give it special pleading and say, this must be true because we're starting with this is God's word somehow, and therefore it must be what we picture it to be. So I'm with you on all of these issues.
Yeah, and I'm sympathetic because I have some, in the course of this last year, I've actually made a few pretty good friends with some Christian apologists that I've engaged with that are engaging with me in what I feel is good faith.
Right.
And obviously we have some disagreements on stuff, but when they study the Bible, the individuals I'm thinking of specifically are all, their careers are as Christian teachers, apologists, stuff like that. And I am hyper aware of how your livelihood influences your thinking. Mm-hmm. Because I notice as I look back at my life that I didn't really start questioning. The questions didn't, it's like my brain wouldn't even articulate the questions fully as long as I subconsciously knew that my livelihood was on the line. It's like I just wasn't going to question it. I wasn't actively pushing my doubts down. They weren't blossoming because on some level I knew that my livelihood would be at risk. And so like I'm hyper aware of that dynamic. So when I engage with Christian apologists and I'm like, well, your entire education was at a school where you signed a statement of faith before you studied. Mm-hmm. It's like you presupposed before you even looked at the information. And you might be making a very sincere effort to be objective, but when your whole livelihood is wrapped up in this particular point of view, you have such an unbelievably massive incentive to continue to see it that way.
You're right. And it doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean that.
No. And it doesn't mean they're being dishonest. It doesn't mean they're being inauthentic. I think so much of this happens subconsciously. And I have to absolutely concede it happens on the other side too. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that I've been trying to root out in my own thinking. And like, what ideas am I prejudiced against now because I'm a guy that's come out as a deconverted Christian, right? Like, do I have a stake in like what would happen now if I started to flirt with the idea of being Christian again?
Right.
Like, would I be disowned by all the people that welcomed me over the last year? Is that influencing my thinking somehow? And I'm thinking about that a lot these days and going like, not that I'm, calling myself a Christian again or anything like that. I'm just going like, if I were to go down that road, like how available is that to me emotionally?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you just brought up a word, emotionally. I think most of us, and I say this from my own experience, there's more than just emotions that play a role. Don't get me wrong. There's so much more to the life as to why I was a Christian. But I think emotions are the very reason I remained and kept going into this, by experiencing love through the music and the fellowship. And there's an emotional attachment there. And so, yes, I think we attach in the opposite direction emotionally. I try to point out my biases up front, and I do want to know a natural explanation. I think it's logical to do such things. For example, if you knew in antiquity, God is the reason the volcano, like he's actively causing the eruption, and now we know tectonic plates or whatever it might be causing a shift in the crust, causing these volcanoes to erupt. You start finding out why things happen in a way. Now you could pretend and say, I say pretend because you don't know this. You just assume it. Well, behind that, metaphysically, God is somehow triggering things to cause the crust of the earth to, you could pretend behind the scenes with no visibility that God's involved actively. But once you see 9 times out of 10, the way the ancients understood these things, they didn't see a spherical world the way we do in the 21st century. They had a different concept and cosmology of Earth. Once you see 9 out of 10 of those things answered naturally and having an explanation that we can actually see, test, show, experiment with and show, then it's, yes, there's still like that 10th thing that we don't know the answer to, or there's those things we're not sure about yet. But I don't think it's a leap to say, well, we figured out 9 out of 10, and it used to have a superstition explanation. Like we used to just say, God did that. The reason that this plague happened in Israel, the angel of death came, or the angel of God caused the plague, and we had this many people die because David numbered Israel before battle because he didn't have enough faith in God. Whoa. I mean, once you start evaluating that stuff critically, and you're not like, I'm rooting for my home team when I come into this. I'm a Panthers fan because I'm from North Carolina. I'm rooting for them no matter what. Not, based on this next football game, I'm going to see based on the performance and each player's expertise. And if they throw better, like if I see how their performance plays out, then I'll choose which team is actually better based on that.
There's so much superstition in sports, man.
I know. Just making the point.
Sports are more religious than religion, I think, sometimes. But yeah, I think another example of what you're talking about is like a good one for me is like demon possession. So, like we understand things about psychology and mental health that we just didn't understand thousands of years ago. And so for a long time, when people had mental issues, it would just be considered like, the demon possession, or they have an unclean spirit or something like that. And like, we know better now. And so I agree with you. Like I will always prefer a naturalistic explanation. Or a physicalist or materialist explanation when it's available.
Right.
I have been dabbling in some ideas recently that go beyond that a little bit, but I sort of look at things in 2 buckets. Like there's bucket 1 is like things we can investigate scientifically, empirically, and like have that kind of certainty about. Mm-hmm. And then bucket 2 is like, okay, these are things we can't be sure about, but it's fun to play in the sandbox. So consciousness, I've been learning a lot about consciousness recently. And there's some ideas about consciousness, like panpsychism as sort of defended by Philip Goff, I think is really interesting. Idealism as defended by Bernardo Kastrup, I think is really interesting. Those are both ideas that posit things beyond the empirical world that we can't like empirically prove, but they're interesting to think about.
I interviewed Bernardo, and actually I got to check this other guy out, but I also like to look at the philosophers who take that natural approach, and I want to try and have debates between these guys because I don't mean debates. Maybe it's better to just do discussions. I like to have them come on and say their piece and like engage in a conversation rather than rooting for a team. But Bernardo even committed to this idea, and he said, well, he thinks that what consciousness is, this mind, if you will, outside, it's just trying to figure itself out. It's not comfortable. And you're like, hold on, that's not God. Like now you're talking about an open theistic, like God's learning like humans are learning type of picture. And that doesn't, I mean, you could get
his views are sort of in line with open theism, but I think most people, when they encounter open theists, they're in the West anyways, they're probably encountering progressive Christians that would consider themselves open theists. And Bernardo is, as far as I know, is not that.
Yeah, he's not a Christian like I don't think. But he's definitely into something.
But this is an interesting point that you're bringing up, because I think for people that are investigating, like, is God real or is God not real? The idea of Christianity and the Christian Orthodox view of God, and then the notion of God in general, those two things are often treated as if they're one and the same, and they're so not. Like, because like there could be some sort of a first cause or like an uncreated creator, but getting to Christianity and the Christian God involves a lot of additional information. It involves a lot of attributes that you'd have to sort of go through one by one. And so I'm much more open to the idea of there being some sort of first cause in a non-Christian-y kind of way.
Right.
Because most of my gripes with the idea of God have to do with the omni traits and the way that God's portrayed in the Bible and in Christian culture today.
You're going to want to watch this interview that I have when it launches with John J. Collins that I did.
Oh, yeah.
I asked him a question. I said, hey, so tell me, what is God, right? Like, tell me about God. And he starts laughing because it's like, that's a big question to ask, but he knows I'm framing it within Hebrew Bible. So it's like, he's a Hebrew Bible scholar, expert, legend who just retired. Like, the guy's a head honcho in the field. And he started laughing. Oh, and I'm like, well, let's boil it down. Like, God's attributes. Like, is God this omniscient, all-powerful, all-knowing deity who's just anthropomorphizing in the text like he's human? And he's like, no. Let me tell you the God of the Hebrew Bible. And he starts to explain it. So a lot of these concepts of God are anachronistic. People are putting in this idea, and especially like, I like to think Paul's doing that. If you're looking, and I say Paul, but really the author of Luke Acts, when he has Paul in Acts 17 come up to the Epicureans and the Stoics, and he's presenting this unknown God that they have not heard, from one man, all the nations of the earth, blah, 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 that in him we move, we breathe, we have our being. It seems like Platonic philosophy starts to find its way into this preachy message, and that God is like the supreme natural law, all powerful, mighty. And it doesn't look that way when you look at a lot of different stuff within the sources of the Old Testament. So yeah, I mean, I love diving into this stuff. If there's a God, I'll say it like this, or whatever that means, something more powerful than us that possibly caused all things or is in control. It's possible. I tend to think like what I did, and I want to get your take on this, where you're at in your, because you're still probably deconverting like I am. Like, it's just a lifelong type of thing. You've left Christianity, but you're.
Yeah, I'm still really curious. Like, for a season, I was really curious, like, why is it that basically every society that's ever formed has had an associated religion? Like, religion's doing something. What is that something? So like one of the answers that has been compelling in my view is the idea. Well, I think it does three main. Do you mind if I share what I think the three main things are? Yeah. So I think the three main things that religion does are socially, it helps adhere social groups. So if you've read *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, it talks about how early hunter-gatherer societies tended to be much smaller, and to grow societies bigger than maybe 100 or a couple hundred people, or maybe even bigger than lower than number than that maybe. They had to have something that adhered the group, and religion seems to have been that thing. Shared fiction, a sense of being on the same team. Like, if you're a Miami Dolphins fan and you go to Seattle and you see someone else wearing a Miami Dolphins hat, like, you trust that person a little more than your average stranger because you're both Miami Dolphins fans. It's like, that's a silly example, but like, religion does seem to do that. So I think social cohesion is one of the functions of religion. But then I also think it's ideological in nature. So it helps explain our past and where we come from. It helps connect us to the past in that sense, and give us a sense that we're not just thrown into this existence for no reason. We're a part of a chain of events that has a purpose.
And oftentimes it's letting us know that the future isn't dark or
that's
something
the third
like
one.
that.
Yeah.
Right.
So the third one is it gives us the hope that this life is not all there is, because most religions have some kind of an afterlife situation. I mean, not all, certainly, but at least some sort of sense of connectedness to like eternity. So like in Christianity, you have heaven and hell, because I think the two main desires of people when they think about forever or like an afterlife are like, I would love a life devoid of suffering, and I would love justice. I would love to see justice, because we look around at life and what do we see? We see suffering and we see injustice, and we want both of those things fixed. And me going to heaven and that bad guy over there going to hell solves both of those. So I think, and karma does the same thing, right? Like reincarnation and karma. It's like your life will get better if you're good. You'll get a better life in the future. And people that are like awful, they're going to be punished by, having a crappy life next time. It's the same function. So
I'm going to tell you this, I love what you just said, by the way. And we got a super chat. I want to get to Endo's super chat here in just a second, but I wanted to say everything that we're picturing in these cultures, like I can see how they, from me, like I can see how these concepts would have evolved.
Yeah, exactly.
Like naturally, like it wouldn't require a deity to have taught these things. Right. In fact, it makes perfect sense why certain cultures have repeated lives and reincarnation, whereas others have, once you die, final justice, judgment, right? You have an enthroned judgment, because now you have, like, by the time these concepts are probably coming on, you have kings ruling nations. So you have a just, noble, supreme king, just a bigger version of your earthly king you experience here on earth, who's now going to lay out the justice and say, you were bad and you were good, and here you go, or whatever it might be. But all of those things could be explained without having to invoke the supernatural, is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is there something called supernatural? Is there some supernatural? Don't know. Personally, there are people who experience things, but then I also have my own take on why experiences happen. And I mean, people go, well, at that point, you're just closed off. No, I think I've never explored it like this. I've never considered, all right, Billy Bob over there has schizophrenia. He sees the devil every Wednesday when he doesn't take his medicine, okay? He's telling me he's seeing flames and demons eating flesh and all this kind of stuff. Whatever the mental health might be, there's a chemical situation going on in his brain that's different than mine that's causing him to see this. Is it real what he's experiencing? Some of these spiritualists that I've talked to on this channel, by the way, AJ Miller, he claims to be Jesus from Australia. This guy really thinks he's Jesus. One of his first cult members who followed him leaves him, doesn't believe he's Jesus, but still believes all the other woo-woo. I call it woo-woo because it gets into some weird stuff. Yeah. And he says that schizophrenia, by the way, he works in the mental health field, says he teaches his people to stop taking their medicine, because those are actual spirits in the other realm communicating with him. And I teach them how to have those conversations to tone those voices down. Look at the scary level at which spiritual, open-minded people can potentially go to by saying, well, that schizophrenia doesn't need to be diagnosed by medicine, natural means. Let's focus on the spiritual. We can tap into that. Why don't we help him? We can probably find a way to cast out this demon that's schizophrenia or whatever. There's levels that it gets crazy. And it makes me wonder. It makes me just think like, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, that stuff's scary, because then you're, I mean, at least for me personally, like that's where I will take the tack of like, hey, dude, I'm just a dumb band guy. I don't want to be responsible for making any comment on whether or not we should. I mean, I lean towards treating schizophrenia as a psychological condition.
Well, I've worked in the mental health field, drug addiction mainly, but like people, a lot of drug addicts are people who suffer with mental health, whether it be BPD, whatever it might be that they suffer with, and they need medical attention. To pretend that they need to go do this or go see this shaman, so to speak. Sure, there might be some psychedelic stuff that has helped in a way with a lot of treatment, but that's a whole nother discussion, that the idea that these are spirits and not, there's something going on here. Like I have dreams and my dreams are real. Like the experience of them are real. But was I really doing the things in my dream, or was that all inside of my head? Well, one person will say dreams are from God. And if you read the Bible, I mean, it sounds like the biblical authors, especially like the Joseph narrative where Joseph can interpret dreams. Yeah. Where are these dreams coming from? Well, that's the worldview of the biblical authors, is that dreams are from God. And so I look at it and go, I have no reason to think that, other than if I lived in a time where we weren't explaining the mechanism for why people would dream.
Yeah.
You get where I'm going with this?
I do. And just to comment on that, I mean, I see that we've got a question here, and I'd be happy to answer it. But just to comment on that real briefly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
One of the things that got me that really caught my attention is in the last year is this study of phenomenology. So Heidegger and sort of the experience of being and the first person subjective experience that each of us have. And so I look back at, my time as a Christian, and then like my friends and family that still are Christian, and like what I think I'm experiencing as intuition at times. Like I have certain thoughts where I'm just like, oh, like I have just an intuition about something. Like I'm interpreting that experience now as intuition. They're interpreting it as the Holy Spirit. Now, if we're talking about what is metaphysically true, one of us is probably wrong, right? But if we're talking about experiences, like that is an experience that they are having.
Yeah, and I don't rule that out. So I need to say that.
But what that revealed to me is a way of continuing to engage with people of faith without taking the tack of like, oh, you're just full of superstition.
Right.
Because
saying their experiences aren't real. That's
right, because they're real to them.
Yes.
And not only that, but I also need to respect the fact that for thousands of years, people have had experiences that they would consider spiritual, or we could call them mystical. And I need to respect the fact that like some of those experiences are really powerful. And while we might have some, through the study of psychology, we might have some more naturalistic explanations for those experiences, I still want to be respectful of them as far as the experience itself goes. Does that make sense? So I feel like a year ago, I was much more like, because I was new to thinking about all this stuff, and not being a Christian was a fresh thing for me. Right. I was very quick to be dismissive of things that now I'm sort of like, well, there's some nuance here. And maybe I should be respectful about that.
Right. And I don't want to come across disrespectful. I'm just trying to understand it.
Oh, no,
right?
I wasn't saying you were. Yeah.
Oh, no. I just want audience to know, because I have experiences all the time. Like I have amazing experiences. I'll get a euphoria when I hear this song, or my wife, I see how true she is to me and she loves me. And like, I get these experiences and they're wonderful. And I don't want to downplay the importance of what I am experiencing. I may be able to explain how and why, but I don't want to play it like, well, that experience has no meaning. No, it has absolute meaning to me as an atheist who doesn't think it requires a God to have those experiences and to have meaning. So as much as I want to say to a Christian, I believe you had an experience, and I do. I believe many people do. I do think I have reasons in my head naturally for why people might have patterns and connect themselves to a narrative or whatever it might be in a natural way. I don't want to downplay their experience as authentic, but I also don't want them to turn around and point fingers to me. All too often, I see this happen with atheists. You think there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's no meaning.
Yeah,
and we give ourselves these things. So we've gone off track of the super chat.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. So Endo asks, how did the people closest to you react? Like your band members today, listen open-mindedly to your reasons. Are you going to start an atheist band now? So I mean, I was
already a mystical band before you know it. You never know.
Who knows? I was already sort of moving on from music in general. So I don't plan on starting an atheist band. Is that a thing?
I don't know.
But as far as the people close to me, everyone that knows me personally, actually, almost without exception, was very, very kind to me. there was a stark separation between the reactions of people that know me personally and the reactions of people that don't.
Right.
I think that's pretty normal. I had sort of privately shared with close friends and family some of my doubts. And I think they might have been a little bit like, when I posted, they might have been a little bit like, oh, you're going all the way now, are you, Jon? Like, there might have been a bit of that. But mostly my friends and family within the Christian community were pretty kind to me. And I'm really grateful for that. And I'm also hyper aware that is not everyone's experience. So I don't want to paint it as such. But I just got lucky, I think. And I also think that subconsciously for quite some time I had been of the persuasion that there was maybe things to doubt. And so I probably had found myself naturally being closest with friends who maybe are of the makeup that would be okay with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I probably already was not friends with people that were hyper strict, hyper religious, hyper, fundamentalist,
Overboard.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was probably already more friends with Christians who were more open-minded, and that probably helped. Yeah.
And that's good. That's good that you didn't have such a horrible experience, because then it could have caused severe bitterness to a point where you're not balanced. I guess we sometimes will let that bitterness
Yeah.
cause our vision about the whole religion and our experience and make everything bad. But I had wonderful experiences back in the day, and it took time to kind of get where I'm at. And I'm also still maturing, trying not to be immature in my approach toward Christians.
Yep.
I'm trying. It's tough though when you get that fundamentalist who comes out of the woodwork, and you're trying not to paint everybody in the same box. And there's a lot of stuff there. So I really
And
appreciate
also
that.
I've been engaging online, and online is an inherently polarizing place. And
Mm,
so, Twitter, I think Twitter is fun, but it does tend to be a place where people's hot takes are rewarded a lot more than nuanced sort of
yeah,
thought.
right.
And then YouTube as well. Like I've enjoyed engaging on YouTube, but it's like, you have a lot of Christian apologists and atheists sort of talking past each other a little bit. Not everybody. Some people are having really, really thoughtful content and engaging content.
Right.
But other times you see people just taking pot shots at each other, and it's just a bunch of arguments from incredulity, right? It's like this atheist believes that you can have morality without God. And I'm like, well, yeah, I actually do think you can have morality without God.
Right.
but like it's more interesting to have a conversation about that than it is to do these takedown pieces that I see
Look at
plenty
this
of,
idiot on screen. Are you ready?
Yeah, yeah. So I think at both sides have some folks that are sort of engaged in that kind of thing. And I guess it's fun for people that want to engage in that tribalistic stuff, but
Yeah.
it's not fun for me.
Right.
And I make an effort on my channel to not talk about individuals as much as possible, to not say oh, such and such an apologist or such and such a pastor is saying this. I try to go hey, here's an idea some people are talking about, and I have some problems with this idea. Let's talk about the idea. And
Mm.
I try to take that tack. But
Dr. Joshua Bowen from Digital Hammurabi Super Chats. He says, can we trust a guy that went to Spirit West Coast? I mean, who would attend such an event?
No, the short answer is no. You shouldn't trust anything I say.
Right.
You should go and do as much learning as you can. The problem with learning is that most of what's out there is what other people say. So it gets a little tricky to we have the Bible. I mean, do you read Greek? I don't. So already in every translation is built in certain editorial decisions we have to
That's true.
take. But anyway, I'm getting on a tangent. Spirit West Coast, yes, that is a festival that we played a number of times. There's a couple different ones. I would, definitely was at that. We actually skydove. neither version of that past tense sounds right to me. But
either way, yeah.
We skydived into Spirit West Coast, Monterey one year. Like that was our show entrance. We came down on parachutes and stuff like that. It was pretty cool.
That's crazy. You guys got to live it up. I was thinking about one of your atheist band names could be Godslack. Instead of Godsmack. Being an idiot. Seriously, thanks for the super chat, Dr. Josh. David the Goliath says, good job, man. Jesus is fake. He died for his own stupidity, not for anybody's sins. Also, Adam and Eve never existed, so no original sin to die for.
Yeah, well, okay, so I have thoughts on that. So Jesus is fake, but he died for his own. So this person doesn't believe that Jesus is a myth, then.
It sounds like it with the follow-up sentence. Yeah.
I'm not a mythicist. I do believe Jesus was a real person. Right. Adam and Eve. Yeah, I don't believe that there were a literal Adam and Eve. Right. So I'm with you on that, David. And original sin, I actually think, is one of the most problematic doctrines in Christianity, because it teaches people that no matter what you do, you're bad. And
now, if my wife turned and said to me, "You're naughty," I might take that.
Well, that can mean a few different things.
Exactly.
Some people like that kind of thing. But I think original sin is a really problematic doctrine, because at least in the circles I grew up in, it got extrapolated into that idea that, like, you're bad, you're unworthy, you're dirty. You shouldn't trust yourself. You shouldn't trust your desires. You shouldn't trust your own body. You shouldn't trust your intuition. Instead, you need to set all of that aside and do. It'll be worded as what Scripture tells you to do, but what is really going on there is that it's like, do what we say you should do based on our interpretation of Scripture. And so I think it's been used to manipulate a lot of people and make people not trust themselves.
That's well said.
And I think if you were going to set up a cult in which you manipulated people, you would have to get them to not trust their intuition. That's like step one. And so I think original sin, even for well-meaning Christians, I think it performs that function in teaching people to not trust themselves.
I think I interview ex-Scientology people too, and they talk about how they kind of bait and switch. You get in, then you find out you have all these Satan spirits attached to you that need to be removed. And like, oh yeah, they get you. You're right. Like, all of these cults have a way. Thanks for that super chat, David Goliath. Ben Lamoureux, thank you, my friend. Now get ready, man, because his questions are always brain busters.
Sure, no problem.
Was Hawk Nelson pressured by the industry to be more overtly Christian? Preach at shows, etc. I've heard MXPX and other TNN bands experience that. Wow, Ben, that was a normal question.
Great question. So the TNN he's referring to is Tooth and Nail. That was our record label for the first 5 albums we did, and then we had another record label, a different one, for our final 3. It's an interesting question because what's going on a lot of the time is the industry is just, its goal is to make money, right? And that's not inherently good or bad. Every business, it's not going to succeed if it doesn't make money. So what the industry does is it responds to a market. And in this case, the market is Christian music, Christian music listeners. And so it's going to respond to culture. And so in the early 2000s, when we started out as a band, it was really common for Christians and Christian families to want Christian versions of secular bands. So it was like, for us, it was like, oh, if your kid really loves Blink-182 and Good Charlotte, then here you can listen to Hawk Nelson and Reliant K instead. And so that was like one of the main cultural things going on in Christian music at that time. So there was room for bands like us who weren't overly spiritual, weren't overly preachy, but we were positive and parents knew we were Christian, so we were safe, right? Safe for the whole family. That's the Fish, which is a big Christian radio network. That's their tagline: safe for the whole family. which is always interesting. It's like safe is our highest ideal, right? It just implies like it's dangerous out there. So as Christian culture changed, Christian culture as a whole became much more nuanced about, like, we're not just looking at things like Christian band versus general market, Christian band good, general market band bad. Christian culture started to look at things more like, hey, like maybe it's okay to listen to Taylor Swift, before she started like loving gay people and stuff. But like there was this tendency to sort of accept, oh, I'm out of focus. What happened? There we go. There was sort of this tendency that things changed to where it wasn't so black and white anymore. It was okay to listen to general market bands as long as they weren't, overly sexualized or like talking about horrible things. And so when that happened, the Christian music industry had to become more spiritual and more overtly Christian, because that was the only reason people would listen to it. And so that's one of the reasons you see, like, if you listen to Christian radio 15 years ago, there was very little praise and worship. And now the majority is praise and worship. And so there were these cultural things going on, and Christian bands had to either evolve or die. And so some Christian bands, like your Switchfoot, your Colony House, who are really dear friends of mine, there's some of these bands that just sort of went, well, like, we're going to be Christians, but we're just going to go be general market bands and make art. And that's cool. And then other artists were like, well, if we're going to be in the Christian music world, we're going to have to be more overt and more spiritual and more, sort of, I guess preachy is a word you could use, because that's what this Christian music community now wants. And so labels might put pressure on their bands to do that, but it's not malicious. It's just going like, hey, this is what the market looks like right now.
Did you ever have to preach at shows? I mean, did you guys
I didn't preach, and I never felt the need to, although it's squishy, right? Because you would see other bands talk about things between songs, and you would notice that those bands that were doing that more tended to see more success. So there was these things that were sort of in the ether that's like, well, you might want to get good at this. So I remember sort of like developing that skill of like, well, in between songs, I want to stay authentic to how I believe and how I want to express my faith. But I do feel like I need to sort of do more than just get up and sing songs for fun. So I hope that sort of answers the question. There definitely was more pressure to be more overtly Christian, or just bug out and be a general market band. Like, you kind of had to. Yep. I have a ton of respect for them. I'm friends with those guys. They live not that far from me. And I have a lot of respect for how they've made their way in the world and continue to sort of make art that asks thoughtful questions on the edges of faith. I think that's really cool.
Thank you. Appreciate that super chat, Ben. Cowboy 1000. Thank you for the super chat. Which authors were most influential during your deconversion?
Great question. The list is long. I had a newborn. At any given time during the process, I at least had one newborn. And so I was getting up, to do night feedings. And so I started just getting up at, 4 and staying up. And so I would have, three or so hours every morning to read. And so I read a lot. Definitely. I've already mentioned Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, who I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. That's a book about the sort of evolution of humanity that was really powerful for me because it was really compelling. That was one. A number of texts by Bart Ehrman, who I know you've interviewed before, looking at textual criticism in the Bible in a new way. There's a book called The Social Leap by William von Hippel, who I actually am going to have on my channel in the next couple of weeks. I've already interviewed him, but I'm just going to air it. And he looks at human evolution through the lens of psychology, which there's a lot of really interesting things to learn about there. I mean, I did sort of do the lap around the new atheist pool, like I read Sam Harris, I read Richard Dawkins, I read what's his name? I got Dan Dennett was the last one I got to of the Horsemen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think stuff about textual criticism was really big for me. I actually struck up a friendship with Sean McDowell, who's a Christian apologist and professor at Biola here in Southern California. And I promised him I would read Evidence That Demands a Verdict before I knew how long it was. And it's like a textbook. So I read that and honestly, some of the things that I've read from Christians were a part of my deconstruction too, because I just found the solutions to some of my existential problems really dissatisfying. So yeah, I need to think about. I made a list on my Instagram at one point of all the stuff that I had been reading. I feel like I'm failing to remember a lot of the good stuff right now, but yeah.
Worth checking out. And you can follow him on Instagram, of course. And he's on Twitter. Humbly Questioning, thank you for the super chat, says, what's missing from non-theism? Have you started any practice, e.g. meditation? What has impacted you most since deconversion? When is your next episode?
Yeah, I took a little break from making episodes for a couple of reasons. I had been doing it weekly for about 6 months, and I had some stuff going on in my family that I just needed to prioritize my family for a little bit. And so I did that, and I'm glad I did. Took a little break from being online, and it felt like a healthy breather. But I think as we get into the fall, I'm planning on engaging with this stuff a little bit more. I think from a slightly different perspective. I'm not looking at it through a deconstruction lens so much anymore. I'm looking at it from like I want to study philosophy, and I want to study, existence and evolution, and my show is called The Wonder and the Mystery of Being, and so I want to get more into like this experience of being, but yeah, meditation, some Eastern thought was actually really helpful for me, and I do practice meditation. There's some guided meditations I really like. I know not everyone loves Deepak Chopra, but he's got some good guided meditations I like. And then yeah, could you put the question back up? There's a couple other things that I meant to. Oh, what's missing from non-theism? I thought that was a really, really good question. So for me, the biggest thing, I always find we're always trying to find ways of avoiding the word atheism. It seems like, but non-theism, to me, maybe nothing. But I have questions about consciousness that physicalism and materialism don't necessarily seem to satisfyingly answer for me. So for me, I'm spending a lot of time learning about consciousness right now, which I'm discovering is not great dinner conversation.
It's definitely a complex topic. It's definitely. Thank you, Humbly. I appreciate the super chat. We got a couple more here.
Sure.
Sorry for throwing them at you, man. When people throw super chats, I always try to pop them up.
Love it.
Christianity's doctrines were not made by Jesus. Poor chap probably claimed to be a Messiah, end of the world, and was executed by Romans like other Jews. His followers turned his death into dying for sins. Appreciate the super chat, Sid. Yeah, like, what's your personal take from what you've explored? Do you just agree, like, with Bart Ehrman? I mean, like, because I personally, don't know how to answer a lot of these things because I see multiple explanations for some of them. But that's from like constantly asking other scholars. I mean, my whole channel's loaded with that. What is the most convincing thing that you're aware of right now for you on what happened with Jesus to your best of your knowledge?
I'm pretty convinced that Jesus was a Jewish apocalyptic prophet. I find that argument very, very compelling, which means he probably, well, for one thing, we have to start with acknowledging the fact that Jesus didn't leave us any writings of his own. So we don't have anything in Jesus's own words. So that's something that as a Christian never occurred to me, that would be a lack, but
Right.
that is something we lack. We don't have anything that he wrote. All of the accounts of his ministry and his, teachings I'm not persuaded that any of them are eyewitness accounts. So Mark and Luke don't claim to be. Matthew and John, according to Christian tradition, are written by the disciples Matthew and John, but I don't find the arguments for that authorship compelling. So right. I don't think that's a whole other conversation, but I don't think that we know exactly what Jesus taught. So I do think, as you alluded to a minute ago, most people are going to approach the idea of what did Jesus teach from the perspective of some preconceived notions of some kind, in one way or another. So I think it's very, very difficult. But my intuition and my gut, and from what I've read, kind of makes me think Jesus was probably a Jewish apocalyptic prophet. He might have believed he was the Messiah, but that's a different thing than believing you're God. I don't know that he believed he was divine. He did, I don't. Where I see Christianity forming in some sort of recognizable way is in Paul. And so is the question that I've been tinkering with recently is like, did Paul take a sect of Judaism and turn it into a religion for Gentiles? And
you're going to hell. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I think you can make an argument that that's what happened. Yeah. I don't think it's definitive. It's certainly not the only explanation. I find it really interesting that Paul, if you look at Paul's teachings and you look at Jesus's, they are not the same.
Yeah.
I mean, I would leave the Gospel of John aside because the Gospel of John is the latest gospel written, and it has Jesus. It depicts Jesus completely different than the other gospels, and in ways it's later also. So I just think take Jesus in the synoptic gospels and then you take Paul, and they sound very different to me. And it does seem like modern Christianity has a lot more associations with Paul than what I read in the gospels of Jesus. So I'm somewhat in the agreement with Sid Dave here, because I think that Jesus was Jewish, quintessentially Jewish.
Your focus, it does that from time to time.
And so I think if you were to add up all the sermons preached in evangelical churches and note what books of the Bible they're being preached from, I would bet you more teachings come from the epistles of Paul, both the debated ones and the not debated ones. I would bet you more of those teachings are present in evangelical culture than teachings of Jesus from the synoptic gospels. I would bet,
especially from Matthew, people who obeying the law and whatnot. And
because Matthew's gospel was the most Jewish, you could say. He refers to the kingdom of heaven rather than the kingdom of God because they avoid saying God. He definitely seems to affirm the law, where Paul takes the exact opposite approach. And one of the things I find really convincing, just to stay on this for a second, is that a lot of times when you bring up the idea that Paul commandeered is an extreme word, but that Paul sort of took this Jewish sect of early Christians or Jesus followers and ran with it and changed it. One of the things you'll hear from Christians in opposition to that idea is that no, look at Peter, look at 2 Peter. It really affirms Paul's writings as scripture. Well, basically no scholar thinks that Peter wrote 2 Peter. So
no scholar that obviously doesn't have an evangelical, approach, if that makes sense.
Right. But I think even the majority of
Christians, even Eusebius, thought that the letter was a forgery, or at least
that's
not authentic.
That's what I mean. Like even a lot of conservative, even of the more, 2 Peter there are very few scholars that think that was actually written by Second Peter or by Peter.
Yeah.
So a lot of the responses to this thinking that Paul took this early Jesus following tradition and made something out of it, a lot of the responses to that within Scripture come from books that seem to not have been written by the people that tradition says they're written by. So that's.
Thank you for that answer. And then Trip, in the same vein, he super chatted like right after, and it's kind of the same thing. Like, what are your current thoughts on Jesus as a person? So I guess like instead of saying he was an apocalyptic preacher or anything, like, do you have any personal thoughts? Like, do you think this guy, like, what's your personal? I don't want to read into your answer on this.
Yeah.
Is there anything you can add to that?
Jesus is a person whose presence is unavoidable in Western culture. You're just not going to be able to get away from ideas of Jesus. So I think Jesus is someone that's worth studying. And so that's one of the things that I've been interested in. And my curiosity has only grown. But I always come back to, like, there's a lot I don't know. That, we don't have any writings from Jesus. We don't have, and I don't believe we have firsthand accounts of Jesus written. So I think it's very difficult to access the historical Jesus. There's things that historians, there's methods that they can do, to sort of like through various analytical techniques go like, well, Jesus here, this is Jesus, King of the Jews, the sign above the top of the cross. Like, there's textual reasons and historical reasons to believe that was probably true. That probably was real. But like, there's just not a lot about Jesus that we can know for sure. And so some of the teachings I find in the Gospels, I find really compelling, like the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. I think that's remarkable. This idea of turning on your, like this idea that it's the poor in spirit who will inherit the earth. This turning everything on its head, and refocusing on the needy, and I think the Sermon on the Mount is a remarkable piece of literature. Do I think that Jesus said that stuff word for word? I have no idea. Probably not. Sometimes I think about, like, even if Matthew was written by an eyewitness, we all pretty much agree it was written at least 30 years after the fact. Like, would you remember that long a speech word for word?
See, you're being too rational, though. You see, don't you know the magical spirit reminded them and had them write it? You already know how this works.
Yeah. So, but again, we can approach Jesus a couple of different ways. We can approach Jesus as an historical figure that we want to learn about. We can approach Jesus as an idea, which is what I think Christianity is actually doing. And I actually don't think that that's worthless necessarily. I think there's, like, I've learned a lot from studying Jesus the last, more intensely the last year or two from a different perspective.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
There's a little dust up online right now. A loose friend of mine, Michael Gunger, who also has gone on his own sort of journey from Christian music to atheism to a more woo-woo sort of progressive Christianity. Or I don't even know if he would call it that, but there was a little dust up on Twitter over the weekend because he said something to the effect of, Jesus was Christ, Buddha was Christ, Muhammad was Christ. Christ is the universe perceiving itself, or something like that. I can't remember what the exact wording is. I don't want to put words in his mouth. But of course, there was a huge dust up about that.
I bet.
So yeah.
You can't even say things like that. How do you feel about prophecy? And thank you guys for the super chats. Like, since you're not, so you're not a Christian now, but you're obviously not closed off to like exploring consciousness and things like that. How, in your mindset, maybe you can address what you think about prophecy, like biblical prophecy, and then maybe like the idea of foretelling the future type stuff. Like, where are you closed off to that, or that's a bad way to phrase it. Like,
I think I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I take the same tack as you, what you said earlier. Like I prefer naturalistic explanations for things. I'm open to the idea that there might be things that don't have, materialist or physicalist. I prefer those terms to naturalistic because
Right.
the supernatural natural divide is problematic to me.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I think we are as a species, we're very, very interested in coming up with finding patterns. We're very, very great pattern recognizers, and that you could see evolutionarily how that would be a benefit. To be able to recognize patterns means you can predict things. Being able to predict things might help you survive. So I think we look for patterns all the time, right? And
Right.
I think prophecy is often a case of certain people being very good at seeing patterns or calling out a pattern or something like that, or just full on pulling the wool, over people's eyes.
Sometimes it's flip a coin. Like Dr. Collins, the guy that I was telling you about, Professor Collins, he talks about how in antiquity, when you look at these prophets in the Bible, he does see there's some historical verisimilitude there. And he'll say, like, these prophets were employed by kings most of the time. Sometimes the king had 400. I mean, like, he had a bunch of these prophets on his payroll. And it was like, sometimes it was this simple. All right, we're going to go fight the Babylonians. Okay. Are we going to win this fight or not? Flip a coin. Now, it gets problematic because the prophets would say, yeah, we're going to win this war, king. And they're butt kissing because you don't want to give the king bad news when he's ready to go kick the Babylonians. You know what? Yeah. So they would say, yeah, you're going to win this war. But oftentimes it's like 50-50. Flip a coin, roll a dice. What are the odds you're going to get it wrong? Well, 50% chance. So if you get it right, see, we're really prophets.
Yeah.
And so there's like you talk about with patterns that could play a role into this. And some people think, this is prophecy. But the idea that hundreds of years prior, they're predicting this specific exact person to a T is going to come and this stuff's going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. Like,
there's a couple. Well, there's a couple specific ones that Christians lean pretty heavily on. So most Christians believe that Isaiah, I think it's 52 or 53, predicts the coming of Christ, or predicts the crucifixion, the suffering. It's the suffering servant verses. And indeed, if you know the story of Jesus and then you go back and read those passages in Isaiah, you're like, wow, that sounds a lot like Jesus. But like, it doesn't take much digging into. We have to remember the Old Testament is the Hebrew Bible. It's really a part of an entirely different, not entirely different, but Judaism and Christianity are separate belief, structures. They're separate identities. If you go and study, like, well, what do Jews, what does Judaism believe about Isaiah, those passages in Isaiah? And they have a very compelling view that, like, the suffering servant represents Israel.
Right.
And so, like, what I see happening in that situation is Christians coming to the text with this preconceived idea of Jesus and seeing a similarity and going like, see, that is predicting Jesus. And I'm just not convinced that is a real prediction. And then you have a similar problem with the book of Daniel, where I think you've dived into these waters, right?
Yeah. I'm having fun listening to you, though, man.
I mean, so you're familiar, like the book of Daniel, there's disagreement. Do we date this to the 6th century BCE, or do we date this to the 2nd century? Most non-believing scholars will date it to the 2nd century because it seems to them that the writers of Daniel had access to the information of what was going on right up until about 167, 164 BCE, and then don't seem to be aware of the events that happen after that. So it's like they can date pretty accurately to that. Well, a lot of Christian scholars that believe in an older dating, they believe that that was predictive and prophetic.
Right.
And there is a certain amount of like the conservative, like the Christian scholars will say, like, well, anyone who's dating it in the 2nd century is biased against the supernatural. And people that date it in the 2nd century say like, well, you're biased because you have preconceived religious ideas. And so it's like, whether to.
I mean, I think for me, finding out, for me, this is just me, and this is really your story, but I mean, like, you might relate.
No, I
to
love
what I'm
this.
saying.
I love this. Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to hog anything here.
No, please don't. I don't want to just spout out the whole time.
I have bias, if you will, that were created because I found out these things. So like, once I found out the magic trick and it's solved in a way that was not how I was taught, it now makes me go, well, how many more places are like Daniel?
Yes.
How many other spots are there problems in this magic, perfect, inerrant, infallible text? And so I started to look and listen to the other side, because I said, holy crap, I've always ignored them. I listened to William Lane Craig. I listened to Ravi Zacharias back before everything ever happened and he died, okay? I have a box. Man, I can go grab this box and show you. I have a thing of CDs of his from like the last 15 years of, I bought everything from RZIM Ministries and was like studying apologetics and stuff. And when I found out, holy moly, when I was open-minded after relapsing again from my drug addiction, I actually listened to the people that I would never have actually listened to. Oh, I listened, but I didn't listen. I was like, all right, how's William Lane Craig going to mop your ass? You know, like how's my teammate going to win?
Yeah.
And how's my faith only going to be, I'm going to make sure my faith is true. I'm going to see that it's true because William Lane Craig's going to bat and he can't ever lose. Yeah. Like, that was my mindset. I couldn't imagine that the other side ever had anything to really bring to the table, because I'm starting with God's word's true. This is accurate. And that's it. Once I found out there's flaws in that idea, then I said, oh my gosh, let me see if there are more. I listened. Once you start hearing more and more of them, are you actually going to sit there and take the time to listen to some apologist who wants to give you some gymnastic explanation, which is less probable than the likelihood that these are humans who made, mistakes, and it's just normal. It has a better humanity explanation than a divine one. Then biases get created, because now it's like, all right, dude,
that's a good point.
I'm becoming a skeptic, not because I hate God overnight. Like, no. And that's the things that I hear sometimes.
God's not dead.
Right. Yeah. It's the evidence that I'm starting to see. Man, I never saw this thing this way. And now that I see it, I can't unsee it. And I'm now biased. I'm okay with that word. Like, I'm totally okay with you saying, Derek's just biased. I damn sure am, because now I see it. Do you?
Yeah.
And that's my question,
I think that's actually a really good articulation, because I think I have noticed since leaving Christianity, I have noticed that I do have, I guess, what you would call a naturalistic bias. Right. Like, or again, there's that word again, but I guess a physicalist bias or a materialist bias. I agree. I have that. And I would just word it as that, like, I prefer non-supernatural, again, problematic term, but I prefer physical, rational explanations when they're available. Mm-hmm. Now there's some problems that I think aren't adequately solved by those types of solutions. And, that's a whole other discussion, but I think you're right. It's like, well, like, there's just certain things that you discover that undermine your trust. Mm-hmm. So like an example is like the long ending of Mark. Like, I know it's noted in the footnotes in the Bible that most of the early manuscripts don't have those last 12 verses and don't have any resurrection accounts in Mark, but I didn't know that as a Christian,
right.
Why
are they not showing this? You have to go to seminary to find these. Like, you don't, I'm not going to say that some churches, but I'm saying I never knew that. I'd been to so many churches. No one ever told me that.
The story of the woman caught in adultery or whatever, that was very likely not in the original Gospel of John, and it's not in the earliest manuscripts. And that, I didn't know that, and so, like, you learn things like this, and I'll have my Christian apologist friends tell me, like, well, that doesn't mean that the rest is not true, or that doesn't mean that Christianity is false. And they're right, that they're correct, that that's not a defeater, but it undermines trust. And it makes me go, like, hey, I grew up being taught that the Genesis account was literal, had to be. And now, like, even my own family who are still Christians are like, well, yeah, I mean, evolution's probably like somewhat true. And like, yeah, it's probably not actually 6,000 years old. It's like, oh, we've moved the goalpost. You learn that Galileo, Galileo, his idea that the earth was not, his putting forth the idea that the earth was not the center of the solar system wasn't accepted by the Catholic Church for 300 years. And he was forced to recant under penalty of torture. And they didn't apologize until 1992. You learn stuff like that and you go like, oh, wait, like, who's biased here? Well
said.
So yeah, I think you're right. It's like you learn enough things and it sort of undermines trust in the Christian narrative. And you start asking like, hey, like, based on these other things that I've learned that turned out not to be true, when I come across something that could be interpreted as evidence of Christianity or just as easily interpreted as not, I might lean towards not based on the fact that that's the way a bunch of these other things have tended to go.
Yeah, and then you get into more things, and I want to get some super chats here just to catch up on people, but
sure,
you get into more things like other faith miracles. Like I'm talking about completely other cultural narratives and miracles, and we're quick and easy to say Greco-Roman mythology. We're quick and easy to say Sumerian mythology.
Yeah, and dismiss it.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, we know these are narratives, and they can view it like literature. But as soon as we get to the Bible, ooh, don't do that. And we have a culture that's built around it. You can't, it's taboo. So I like to use the term Hebrew mythology or biblical mythology and stuff. It's like, whoa, what are you doing? Well, I'm trying to point out that I'm not trying to pick favorites. And when I compare things, I think there's definitely some historical fiction. A genre might play a role in the Genesis account. If people were taught that at church instead of the literalist, fundamentalist Protestant view that we hear all the time, and I say that as fundamentalist, right? Young Earth, all that. Like, you're not going to seem stupid when you find out, hold on, because I bought into the whole thing. Kent Hovind was one of the guys I watched.
Right.
I'm not going to lie, man. I listened to this guy back in the day, and I was like believing in that. So William, thank you for the super chat. He says Christianity makes the most sense in small groups where the people involved have personal relationship with each other and experience soul and spirit. Would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I actually think Christianity is good at, is fostering community. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of people that leave Christianity feel a lack in that area. And I know there's been a number of different efforts to sort of replace that, whether it's humanism or atheist sort of support groups, or support groups doesn't really have the right connotation, but you know what I mean. I haven't seen a real viable alternative to church communities in sort of the secular world. I do think that's actually that's a real problem. And so I'm actually of the persuasion that a lot of people that sort of deconstruct the way that you and I have end up as progressive Christians because they don't want to lose the community aspect. Right. That's something that I feel like is a tendency that I see. And, I engage with a lot of progressive Christians because they are very aligned with me on values. So like we're, tend to be very, pro LGBTQ plus community, hoping for, racial justice and, like seeing social issues improve along racial lines. Like stuff like that, progressive Christians and someone like me who doesn't call myself a Christian, we're aligned on those things. So we're cool, you know what I mean? So yeah, but I agree. Small groups and I mean groups in general is something that Christianity is actually quite good at.
Yeah, religion and
religion, you could say, is quite good at. Yeah.
Ronnie S., thanks for the big super chat, my friend. Isaiah 53 can be used for any Jewish Messiah claimant who got killed by Romans. If we go by Christian logic, they all suffered. New Testament was written in a way so that it appears that Old Testament prophecies are fulfilled. I think you and me would agree that what's more probable, right? Someone wrote the narrative about Jesus
Well,
using the Old Testament.
they obviously had access to it. So yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard the argument that it could be used for any Jewish Messiah claimant. I'd have to think about that more.
I just think that
on the face of it, I think that's true.
I mean, you know, I'm sure you've heard and we've read it in like Acts where it talks about Judas the Galilean and it's the Theodus, I think it is, one of the guys who says, come out here, we're gonna split the Jordan River, and then another guy's talking about the walls of Jerusalem will come down, and just it's all like a Joshua imagery, because Joshua with the walls of Jericho and Joshua with parting the river, it's similar. So there seems to be like, you could see a theme, and I think that if these are apocalyptic messianic claimants, they're probably reading their Bibles trying to like align their life with the ancient text the most they could too. So it's like, how much is historical and how much is mimesis? When I say mimesis, is just copying, using the narrative.
Mimetic.
It's difficult to know what could be historical. Is it completely narrative created fictionally, or is it a combination of things? I mean, it's difficult to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think with regards to Isaiah 53, it's not specific enough to make me feel like it's prophetic. I think it's vague enough. I mean, like, horoscopes have been around for a long time, and they've stuck around because they can say something that seems specific to you, but is actually something that's common enough in people's experience that it can strike a lot of people. So like a good example is I can't tell you how many church services I've been in, and someone will say like, I'm just sensing right now that someone is in a moment of transition. You're in a period of transition in your life where you're considering making a big change, and God's just telling you like, you just need to trust him and go for it. Right now, if you're someone who is in the middle of a big life transition, that's going to be like, holy shit, they're talking about me. Like, for sure, this is God talking about me. Well, in a room full of 2,000 people, how many of those people do you think are in the middle of contemplating a big life tradition? Like, probably a lot. And you know, I think Isaiah 53 strikes me as that kind of a thing.
The way it's applied, like a Nostradamus prediction, you know. Mr. Game, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. A couple more super chats, and I want you guys, when I go to pop these up on the screen, seriously, I thank you all for the support, the love you guys always show with my guest. Whether you agree or disagree, you guys are always really, really kind to my guests. And the ones who aren't, you know, just ignore you. But I'm just being honest.
I've got a pretty thick skin at this point, so
I gotta let everybody know. They gotta subscribe to me. Seriously.
Oh, thank you.
I can't say it enough. Like, you are in a place where I think it's always good to have people who think like you to join in this discussion with you and create a community. And your YouTube channel can be a form of that type of community that helps you in your life. So please go. It's in the description. Subscribe to Jon Steingard's YouTube channel. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more coming as fall comes, because you said you're about to have a lot more happen.
Yeah, and I'm moving into doing a lot more things live like this, because live is fun.
Well, dude, I love this. You're seriously great at communicating these things. I was hoping you were going to play a little guitar with us.
You know what's funny? I don't actually really have a guitar anymore. I haven't played in a couple of years now.
Can I get you to sing maybe like a few verses just for fun? I mean, what can we do to get you to at least do one sentence, man?
Oh, man.
I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm kind of putting you on the spot, ain't I? I mean, like you just have a good voice, bro. So, you know.
I need to check my... I don't know. I literally like, I mean, it's funny, man. The whole music thing, I literally took probably at least a year where like I didn't touch an instrument, didn't listened to music. I listened to podcasts instead because I was just absorbing so much information.
Right.
For me, like music was really tied to this faith experience. And I really did feel like I had to take a break from music in general, which is weird. And it's only been more recently that I'm like, yeah, like we'll have little dance parties with my kids,
That's awesome, man.
and like I've actually like listened to the occasional old thing that I was a part of, and it doesn't immediately trigger me anymore.
Good. Well, okay, never mind. Don't sing anything. We're good.
Well, thanks.
Joel Pearson, thank you for the super chat. Derek, you're kicking arse recently with all these fantastic guests. Jon is an inspiration to all free thinkers. Everyone subscribe to his channel. Thank you so much, Joel. I totally agree with everything you said there, especially the part about me kicking arse. You know what I mean?
I agree with that too. I like, because I mean, just so the audience knows, like you reached out to me very kindly a couple of months ago, and it was just as I was heading into this period I've alluded to of just needing to spend more energy on my family. We left the country for a while, and for not because we don't like the country or anything, it just is unrelated. We just needed some space, and I said, hey, I would love to have a conversation with you, but I can't do it right this second. And you were very, very gracious. And then as that period of time went on between then and now, I've watched a lot more of your content, and it's really great what you're doing. And
thank you.
Engaging with scholars and really wanting to understand, what's going on in these old texts and what's going on in history, what's going on in culture. And so, yeah, I agree. This is a fantastic channel.
Yeah, because we've never been told this stuff. And it really brings some answers, I think, or illuminates the idea like we never really understood what we were reading. And that's it's cool to find that stuff out. Thank you. And I do think you're a wonderful free thinker, and you continue doing. I don't care where you land, bro. I don't care. I don't care if you became a Christian again. I mean, like, honestly, I don't. Obviously, I'd be like, I definitely don't follow that conclusion, but that's your life, man. And I think people need to feel less tension about what the things they think are true. Who cares at the end of the day if that's what you think? It's like the thought police, man. You're not allowed to do that. You're gonna go to hell if you do.
I think one of the things that's important is for people to look at things in a more a la carte way. So, like, I think the tribalism comes in when we look at life as if like, well, I can choose Christianity and that entails all of these things. Or I can choose atheism and that entails all of these things. Right. And it's like, I think it's much better to audit your life and go, what do I really think is true about this issue specifically? What do I think is healthy to play out in my life? Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's really easy to look at these issues in isolation in sort of an abstract way. And really, like, we all have lives. We have people that we care about in our lives. We want to continue to have, I guess, friends, and healthy family relationships. And we want to be good at having people in our lives that maybe don't see things exactly the way we do. And I think all of that stuff is important when we're taking stock of our beliefs and kind of going like, yeah, like, what do I believe about the metaphysical nature of reality is a really fun question. And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. But at the end of the day, I have to put the book down, and I've got 2 kids that I need to provide for and care for and be involved in their lives. And that means, like reading, discussing Daniel Tiger and reading, like children's books the 30th time and going to play dates and having, friendships with people that see things different than me. And I think that's the application of your beliefs and as it comes out in values, I think that's really important.
Very, very well said. Bad omen. Jon doesn't have to answer this if he doesn't want to. But how does he feel about John Cooper's and Elisa Childers' criticalness of deconstruction?
Okay, so I try, like I said earlier, I try not to get into individuals, and I try to stick with ideas. So I've avoided addressing this for some time. John and Elisa are doing an event today, I think, where they're discussing deconstruction from the perspective of like two Christians, and and also Jeremy Camp's involved. And now these are all people that I know personally from my time in Christian music. They did this video promoting this event today, and it has my face in it and my name and a quote of something that I've said. I didn't really love that they called out a bunch of people that have get deconstructed by name and by face. I didn't really love that, but they didn't do anything wrong. Morally, it's all out stuff that's out there. It's fair use, sure.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that if they were going to discuss deconstruction, they would actually have someone on that program that has gone through that process, but they have every right to have an opinion about it from their point of view. So yeah, I hope that's my sort of nuanced response to that. They have every right to do that. I don't love the way they're doing it, and it does feel a little culture war-ish, like we're painting these people as the bad people that have deconstructed, but they're entitled to their point of view, and yeah, I don't want to begrudge them that.
Good question, Bad Omen. Good question. Sid Dave says, always found the virgin birth story funny. And these are the last ones I'm taking, guys, and we got to wrap things up. Always found the virgin birth story funny. Nobody seems to know that Jesus is born of a virgin when he was alive. The Sanhedrin, Pilate, the Jewish mob all forgot that the guy was born of a virgin.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, like the rest of the gospel accounts don't seem to mention, like, outside of that section of Matthew and that section of Luke, it doesn't seem to be relevant to the story ever again. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I was really focused on the fact that the writings before the Gospels never mention it. There's a bunch of stuff that the writings of Paul doesn't.
If I'm to go like to bat to kind of critique that idea, right?
Please
From
do.
a Christian standpoint, I mean, something just comes to my mind, and I guess a Christian would say this. How true this is, don't know, but like, did they actually know he was a virgin? So maybe you have
or she was a virgin.
Born of a virgin.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
That she was a virgin. Did they know that? Because I mean, it seems like most people thought she slept with someone or something wasn't right, or it depends on the narrative too. Each gospel gives you a little more detail in terms of Luke or Matthew. But to me, Joseph just marries her. It doesn't seem like they all went around wearing "I was a virgin when I had you" shirts, like how did these guys know that, or did they know that? And so I wonder if there's any like author fatigue in the Gospels where he slips up saying something like they know he's a virgin or not. I need to look into that. That's an interesting question.
Yeah,
either way, it's just
I hadn't really thought about the rest of the gospel accounts, how that detail never seems relevant again, and whether
but he was a virgin. So I'm not wrong technically. I mean, we don't know Jesus was married or had kids or anything. So
right. Right.
Anyway,
yeah.
sorry.
So no, but I find it interesting that the virgin birth story is so different in Matthew than it is in Luke. Like to me, they're irreconcilable. Obviously, like there's plenty of Christians that disagree with me on that, and they have very creative ways of weaving the narratives together. But like to me, they're like unrecognizable. Like other than Mary, Joseph, Jesus, Bethlehem, everything is different. So that we could do a whole episode on that. But
yeah.
But I'll say that the virgin birth story is one of the things that's a little bit like the most suspicious to me in the New Testament of being something that feels like mythology. Yeah.
Thank you. Last one here, Indo. I think this is the last one. How do you used to justify bad in the Bible, like Elisha and the bears?
Bears.
If you counted your doubts, is it more than the drops in the ocean?
Wow, drops in the ocean. Yeah, we had a big song called "Drops in the Ocean."
Like 20 million views or something.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, on YouTube.
It's more than my channel right now, I'll tell you that. So Elisha and the bears. So I think as a Christian, that's one of those stories that I would have been like, oh, that's weird. And then I would have just moved on, I think I didn't start thinking about the theological implications stories like that until I was already sort of deconstructing or deconverting. Yeah, but now I look at it and I'm like, if you're a Christian and you believe the Bible is inerrant, like the inerrant word of God, then you actually do have to believe that God was angry enough at a bunch of kids for making fun of Elisha and calling him bald, that he got 2 bears to come out of the woods and kill, I think it says 42 children, I think is the number. If anything's an overreaction, that's an overreaction. Right. And then also, like, let's contrast that with like turn the other cheek. Like Jesus is talking about turn the other cheek in like these horrible circumstances. Surely Elisha could survive just fine being mocked by a bunch of kids for being bald.
Seems pretty, yeah. And there's a lot of that bad stuff that we find in the biblical narrative that I never really gave too much thought to. And from like a critical, I never was like, this isn't good. Jephthah is going to do a burnt sacrifice of his daughter because they won the wars. And he said,
oh, that one's problematic too.
Yeah. Like God never said, hey, hold on, we're not doing that, buddy. I'm going to go get the best calf you have or whatever. Like even then that's still like not cool. But either way, you know, it's like you burnt your daughter. There's human sacrifice here.
Yeah. For your audience who is probably familiar with that story, but if they're not, it's basically Jephthah made a vow to God that if God helped them win this battle, that he would sacrifice the first thing to come out the door when he got home. Mm-hmm. And the first thing to come out the door when he got home was his daughter. And so he, after a period of grieving and letting her basically sort of mourn and
her virginity,
virginity, right? Which, because that's the only thing that makes her valuable, right?
Right.
So I'm being facetious, but not entirely.
Not really.
So then she is sacrificed. Nowhere in the story does it indicate that God had any problem with this.
Exactly my problem with it.
Christians will defend it and say like, well, that was unfortunate. Jephthah shouldn't have made that vow and it wasn't God's fault, which I get that argument, but you kind of have to like read the story in its entirety. Can you imagine that story being told? Like the moral of the story at the time would have been something to the effect of it's important to keep your promises and it's to think about what might the implications of your vows might be. Like there's moral, but nothing in there would be like there's nothing in there in the story to indicate that God had any problem with this.
Right. They'll jump to Abraham and see Abraham going to sacrifice Isaac right away. And they'll go, see, God stopped him when he went to do that to Isaac. So God's not okay with this, you know, but yet you see here in Judges 11, that's what's happening. So
yeah.
Big problem.
I know. And I mean, like the biggest one of these to me is the flood, you know, because it's like, wait, God wiped out because there's the whole Sodom and Gomorrah narrative, right? Where it's like, well, like later on, where it's like the question that's being grappled with in that story is like, how many good people does it justify saving a city full of not good people? And that's the back and forth, right? But in the flood story, there's no sense of any sort of mulling that question over. It's like, no, I'm going to wipe out all of humanity. The ultimate genocide ever. And that presumably would include children, obviously. So are we cool with saying that like God committed the largest act of genocide ever?
Even if, in the great way you phrase that, because you're talking about people who believe this actually happened. But even if you painted it as a narrative, like, are you okay with that picture of your God in the 21st century? Now, of course, they would not. Well, God, you don't understand evil, and we all deserve punishment. Like, whoa! And there's so many things that.
Well, that's why we go back to original sin, right? Because it's like you have to have some justification for why God was moral in his decision to kill everybody. So there has to be some like, well, God is righteous and all, man was rebelling and they became so wicked, you know, that God decided to wipe them off the face of the earth. And then I just go like, well, were the newborns wicked? And like, is God not capable of nuance? Like, and also God, when he created everything, this omnipotent God would have, the traditional view of omnipotence includes knowledge of the future. And so God knew this was going to happen and like created anyways. There's all sorts of sort of rational moral questions you could ask at that point.
Yeah, great point. Great show. JM says, thank you both. Thank you for the super chat, JM. And Sid says, he just comments here, if Christians claim that Messiah is to be born of a virgin, if Jesus fulfilled it, then he should have brought it up before the Sanhedrin or before Sanhedrin. No point in fulfilling a prophecy and then never talking about it. Well said, Sid. Something to chew on there. Thank you.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd never really thought about it that way. Yeah.
So many things, man. I want to have you back sometime. Look, I really appreciate you giving me the time, coming hanging out with me on MythVision. You were the lead singer of Hawk Nelson, and that's a big thing. That's a big accomplishment. It's really cool to be able to talk to you after listening to your music for many years.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, and saying, one day the guy I'm listening to while I'm jamming out to Jesus is going to come on to MythVision podcast, and we're going to jam about Jesus.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I find interesting is that I'm still very interested in this stuff. It's just from a different perspective. And I still think the story of Jesus has value. I still think there's things we can learn from scripture. I just look at it differently now. And I also, I sort of reject the idea that not believing in God means you can't be moral or be interested in learning about morality,
Yeah. Well said. Thank you so much. Once again, go subscribe to his YouTube channel. He is growing the channel right now. He hasn't put like everything into it, right? He's going to be doing more. But you can tell by just talking to Jon that he's been collecting a lot of information that he would have never picked up at any of the churches or the places he would go and play his music at. So he's got a lot of videos here. Make sure you guys go help grow his channel, subscribe, like his content, leave him some comments.
Thanks.
Show him some love. Seriously, we are a community here online, and we may not have a church we attend, but you guys matter, and I want you to know that. So make sure you guys help him out.
Yeah, also, thanks a lot, Derek. I appreciate that.
Of course, man. Of course.
And everyone that's watching, I know on average, there's a significant amount of people that watch live streams that are not subscribed. So if you're watching Derek's show, if you're watching the show right now, and if you're not subscribed to Derek's channel, just do him a favor. Subscribe to his channel, hit that like button, and hit the little bell too, and maybe send a super chat and support what he's doing. He's got a Patreon as well. You might want to check that out. There's all sorts of videos that are not available publicly. I'm doing your pitch for you. That's what I'm trying to do.
I was just going to say, all right, send me your address. I'll mail you the check.
Yeah. I'm just going to take a cool 20%. It's not a big deal.
Just just do me like the church. It's all good. I'm not worried.
No, that's only 10. I'm
that's right.
I'm double portion over here.
I feel like more will happen though if I actually give you 20%.
No, but in all seriousness, it for people that make content like this, it actually it might not seem like a single subscriber or a single comment, a single like makes a difference. It actually really does. So if you want to support what Derek's doing, it really does make a difference.
Same for Jon, which is why I always say this, and I get a lot of criticism from time to time on my lives, like, hey guys, like the video so YouTube pays attention, or hey, leave a comment, or if you super chat, you help support what I'm doing. I say that for not only me, but you as well. If you want this quality content, if you think what we're saying is in your alley, you agree with these ideas, or you may not even agree, but you like the freedom of being able to speak about these things, liking it is a free way of saying, we want to try and promote it out there to get more people to see this. And if you want to hear more from Jon, you want to help him grow, it makes it more of an incentive for him to say, hey, honey, I have a large YouTube channel. Can you watch the kids so I can go do a live and hang out with my friends? And you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
And then the wife goes, okay, are you going to argue with 20,000 people or are you going to just argue with me? We can argue later and you can let me go do a live video.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, help support him, man. Seriously, help support us. If you want to support MythVision further, I have tons of videos that have not been released on Patreon, and you can ask questions. I said this at the beginning of this live. I say this almost every video. You can ask personal questions. For example, this video right here, Dr. Joshua Bowen, did Genesis plagiarize, if you will? I know that's a clickbaity word, but is it using Gilgamesh? Is it using, and the apologists say no, but scholars say yes. Listen to the video, and it was asked by one of my Patreon members. So like, if you join the Patreon, you get to ask, look at his face. Look at that face. You don't want to help support that face? I'm just kidding. Dr. Josh is going to laugh when he sees this later.
That's awesome.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Love you. Let's keep it going. And never forget, we are
MythVision.
Ah, you know it. Why didn't you sing it, man? You've got the voice.
Was I supposed to sing it? It's more of a chant.
Can you chant the singing like a I don't know.
I wanted to like I wanted to channel a Seth Andrews voice there, like we are MythVision. he had me. I didn't know him before he had me on his show one time, and early on in the conversation he was like, "So John, you are now an atheist."
Oh my gosh!
And I was like, that's intense.
It was intense.
But you know, like he's got a signature voice, man.
Yeah. I have my signature chant, you know.
Yeah.
And it is that, you know, we are MythVision.
It's very we are Sparta.
That's dude, you're getting it. We are in combat. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Look, I never keep going after I say my chant, and we just did it. You popped my virginity, man.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Tangents, as you know, by now, tangents are my specialty. I did an episode with Apologia, who's like are you familiar with Apologia?
I am.
Yeah. So he's very organized in the way he thinks and makes content and stuff like that. And after we finished the episode of my show that he was on with me he said, wow, the flowchart of that conversation would be really stressful for me.
Wow. He
or something like that.
Time like creating his, because he spends a lot of time in the cartoons and doing all that. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And everything he does is really scripted. So
yeah.
But anyway, I won't keep you, Derek.